Yes. Thank you very much. Mr. Reyes is on the way. Mr. Wesson and Ms. Hahn will not be here. I'll take Mr. Rizzo.
Good morning. The Ad Hoc Committee on Gang Violence and Youth Development will now come to order. We will begin as a subcommittee as we do not have a quorum at this time, and we will be taking items in order that they appear on the agenda, beginning with item number 1.
John White, City Clerk. Item 1, verbal report by Todd Frankie relative to challenges in measuring and evaluating success in City of Los Angeles youth development and gang violence reduction programs.
Okay. Please come forward. Good morning.
Good morning. First, thank you for the opportunity to present my report.
Your name for the
Todd
record?
Frankie. As everyone in the room is aware, the issues related to gang-related youth development are complex and multifaceted. The issues related to measuring the success of efforts to address those are equally as complicated and multifaceted. I think the place to begin is that if you're going to address measurement concerns, they have to be based on some clearly defined theory of change. And I think that a great step has been taken in the adoption of the two-prong approach. And I think that that represents a first step that needs to be built upon. Now, I think Los Angeles is in a great place to add to the knowledge that the country has about how to measure the link between the programs that we put in place to address these issues and the changes that we see. But at this point, I am not at all certain that that's what's been done. As part of preparing this report, I had the opportunity to interview more than 40 people, most of them individually, some of them in focus groups. I had the pleasure of meeting with the Community Engagement Committee at least twice. And through those interviews, I learned a lot of interesting things about measurements and some of the challenges. People told me that they engage in evaluation kind of. And by kind of, I mean they thought of it as more informal evaluation that happens most of the time. Part of the challenge is that, at least the people I talked to, which included a large number of gang intervention specialists along with program people from the Community Development Department, most of it centers around them not having the information, training, and skill to do an evaluation. One of the intervention specialists said, "We don't know enough and we don't have enough money to hire people to help us with what we don't know." And that was clearly echoed by many people. Now, across everyone I interviewed, the thoughts around evaluation and measurement ranged from the really highly skeptical and almost fearful to people that were clearly well into the whole idea of evaluation and measurement. But everyone, and I was impressed and surprised, everyone sees the value in evaluation and accountability. And so the report addresses some of those concerns. In talking to these people and asking them, what they measure and what they count, it was clear that oftentimes what gets counted as evaluation, although not always, is what I would think of more as contract monitoring or auditing. So what people think of evaluation is, you said you'd provide so many units of service, you did. You said you'd hire so many case managers, you did. And I think all of those things are important, but you can do all of those things and not get any of the outcomes that you're after. And so I think that there needs to be more of a focus on evaluating outcomes. Now, of the challenges that came out in the report, or barriers, the first one listed was a lack of clear mission goals and objectives. And as I said, I think there's been a strong move forward with the adoption of the two-prong approach, and I think that that needs to be built on in particular ways. They also told me that there's a lack of built-in evaluation methods. They don't really understand evaluation, and it's not really clear to them how they should do it or at what level they should participate.
Or how to.
Or even how to. I mean, training was an issue that comes up in a minute. There was, they reported a lack of funding for evaluation purposes. They're generally much more, as they should be, much more concerned about providing the services and meeting the needs of the community than about evaluation. But when they're asked to do evaluation, they don't really have a clue how to approach that. There's also the fact that they don't think that funders hold them accountable. And there's some mixed feelings about how accountable they should be held, but by and large, they would like to be held accountable to things that they understand. It's partly training and education. There's lots of things that they don't understand. And lastly, that there tends to be a fear of what they describe as unrealistically high expectations. And this gets to the idea of what we measure and how we go about measuring it. It's clear that if you think about evaluation and measurement, that at least I don't believe that a one-size-fits-all model is going to work. That these evaluations and measurements are going to have to be at some level tailored to the programs and services that are being provided. So to go back to the measurement issue, one of the, as an example, everyone I think would agree that a reduction in gang joining is important. And I think it's going to become more important in the near future. But when
today you're going to tell us how to evaluate that, right?
Well, yeah. Where I think there's a disconnect is we would all agree that reduction in gang joining is an important goal, okay, or outcome of the work that we do. But we have a tendency to think about that first at in my mind, too broad a level. So we want to reduce gang joining in a community, whether that's the new GRYDs or whatever the community is. And I think that should be, at some level, a much longer term program. If you think about it, the agencies that get funded participate in helping reduce the risk factors for adolescents who would be at risk for joining gangs. Yet we tend to immediately go to, well, let's look at the community statistics on if gang joining went down. I would argue that first we should evaluate whatever services are being provided, whether that's mental health or some kind of after-school program or recreation or parenting, that we should at least start evaluating whether those programs did what they said they would do. Then we should evaluate whether the adolescents who participated joined gangs or not before we automatically jump up to the community level and say, oh, look, it worked or it didn't work. NIJ 2 years ago did an evaluation of the programs that they fund around gangs. And they went to look to see how the programs were doing. And they didn't do well. They didn't do well. And it was partly a measurement issue. It was also partly a fidelity issue with the programs not doing what they said they would do. But that's part of evaluation also. So I think that what we really need to focus on, first evaluating and measuring what programs say that they would do, but that should be based on what the theory of change is. And if that's springing from the two-prong approach, it should. With respect to the two-prong approach, which I think is a great start, there are all of these categories in both prongs where someone, not me, someone has to decide what are the important programs for mental health, what are the important programs for after school, or recreation, or parenting classes, or whatever, parent education, whatever it is. And the programs that are picked should be evidence-based. I mean, we as a society have evidence about which of those work and which don't. And we should at least start there about thinking about what gets funded. And then depending on what gets funded, we should design measurements that get right at the heart of what they are designed to do. And if it's all based on this theory of change, then we can start hopefully seeing changes in something like gang joining on a community level. I mean, the challenge is that we serve whoever is served, and we would really like to know whether they join gangs or not. But there's all kinds of people in the community that we're not serving. There's not that much money, at least not right yet. So I think that we need to focus more closely on what the programs are doing and then hold them accountable for what they said that they would do.
Now,
yeah.
Hold on one second. I need to ask you a question. If the city of Los Angeles had to make a decision today, and that is, I think the city recognizes that we are not serving our city well by the fact that we do not have proper evaluation systems and feedback systems and communication on programs. We don't have a good system today. It's there, but it's really at a minimal level. Yet we recognize that we need to figure out a way to get to the point where we have an appropriate, robust system that we can actually point to, utilize, and honestly say, now this is a feedback system, an evaluation system that both creates the ability of accountability and also creates the ability to actually make progress and make changes and improve at the program level, at the bureaucrat level, and at every level. Now the question is this: what would your recommendation be to the city right now? Do we just stop all programs right now until we get that system in place? Or do we figure out a way to get there as quickly as possible and then chime into the system and then hold that system accountable with this new process?
Well, clearly, I think it's the latter. I think that we need to work our way
But wait a
into it.
minute. Why do you go to the latter and not the first part, which is just stop programs right now until we get that system in place?
Because
I know
think
what the answer is, but you have a PhD. Maybe people aren't willing to listen to me, but they'll be willing to listen to you.
Well-
So tell me, please.
Because the programs need to continue to provide services, even if we can't, at this point, adequately evaluate them. I mean, one of the challenges that comes up a lot, particularly when you are at the university versus being in the community, and I tend to be more in the community than at the university, but we need to continue to provide services the best we can, and the service providers are in truth very good at doing what they're doing. What they're not getting any feedback about is whether it's working. I mean,
So wait, hold on,
Okay.
hold on a second. You just said that there are providers out there that are actually doing some good.
they think they are.
They think they are?
Yeah, they think they are.
Well, tell me, do you think there's any good going on in these programs that are at the street level with intervention programs and prevention programs?
I haven't evaluated them, any of them.
So because you have a
Design.
PhD, you're not allowed to give your opinion until you've evaluated them?
Yeah, I try to base my opinion on evidence as much, and I don't have that much evidence. What I've been able to look at has, as I said, mostly been around the area of contract monitoring and auditing, and they seem to be providing the services. And from the qualitative work that's been done in this area, there seems to be a growing amount of stories that would suggest that good things may be happening. But in terms of what I would think of as more outcome-based measures, I haven't seen much work, and there isn't much work around the country. If you look at other programs in Boston or Chicago, there's not much evidence building there either. So this is not just a Los Angeles phenomenon. This is a problem across the country that actually NIJ recognizes as well as everyone else.
So looking at a different system that is within the city and in Chicago and New York and every part of the country, we have police departments. Would you say that the police department is doing effective work out there in the city of Los Angeles?
I would say that there's evidence that the department's efforts on a variety of levels, but including suppression, seem to have impacts from the statistics I've seen. But, so yeah, I would say that they're doing good work.
Okay. But you just said at the beginning of your presentation that the system lacks the evaluation system.
Well, the system, the prevention and intervention programs that are funded by the city
Exactly.
lacks a clear evaluation.
So who's
design.
evaluating the police department? Is the city of Los Angeles providing funding, et cetera, so that the police department can report back and give statistics and crime statistics and things of that nature? So PhDs like you can look at them and give the opinion you just gave?
I think that the city provides the police department funding to
No,
report.
actually it does.
Yeah.
Which is my point. My point is, I do not agree that because the bureaucracy and the policymakers, including the council and the mayor, they have neglected the responsibility of putting an evaluation system in place when it comes to prevention and intervention. Yet at the same time, they have evaluation systems in place for suppression and general policing in the city of Los Angeles. And therefore, we can render an opinion about whether or not the police department has some either modicum of success or effectiveness, et cetera, that's because the bureaucracy in the city and the policymakers have made sure that the funding is theirs and the structure is there for us to have evaluations. Yet at the same time, especially when it comes to prevention and intervention, we failed to do that. It doesn't mean that good work isn't happening. We just don't have the evidence because of the lack of structure to provide the opportunity for us to look at the evidence.
I would agree.
Two different things.
Can I say something here in terms of what you're saying? Very
Sure.
quickly?
Your
I
name,
don't-
please? I know who you are. But
I'm Georgia Leap. And I have served as a consultant behind the scenes to Dr. Frankie on his report. And everything Councilmember Cardenas is stating is true. The fundamental issue is that the City of Los Angeles, and it is not alone in this attitude, has deemed that funding evaluation of anti-gang programs that are either prevention or intervention oriented is not a priority. And certainly in a time of budget crises, this is going to receive short shrift.
Well, I think that it's coupled with it not being it not having been a priority,
No.
coupled with the fact that people think it's not necessary.
Right. But there,
See, with the police department funded at over $1 billion, oh my gosh, we better know what they're doing, although they self-police in some ways anyway, but that's another story. But when we have programs, intervention that's funded at $3.5 million or so, and prevention that's funded at maybe $20+ million, we still haven't arrived at a final number, that, well, we really don't have money for evaluation. It's not necessary because it's not that big a deal.
right,
It is a big deal.
right.
Because the reason why some of the police officers are out there at 1 o'clock in the morning, because there's a dead body, because there was a gang shooting,
Right.
it's the same situation. The only thing is we're funding suppression and policing to the tune of $1.4 billion, but yet we're only funding the front-end elements of prevention and intervention to the tune of $20-some million all told, when you combine them both. And then on top of that, I can guarantee you that to the tune of millions of dollars within the police department, there's millions and millions of dollars being spent every single year when it comes to feedback and evaluations and reporting and things of that nature, and there's almost no money that's been funded when it comes to intervention prevention. So what it's done, it's handicapped us, ourselves, as a city to effectively serve our community, and at the same time, it handicaps somebody like you because you have nothing to go on, and you have a PhD. And you know how to look at evaluations. You know how to evaluate evaluations. You know how to give your opinion on whether or not it's good, bad, or otherwise. But by and large, would you agree with me that when it comes to intervention and intervention, I think it's almost non-existent? Is it?
I would say it's, what I would think of as good outcome evaluation is almost non-existent.
Yeah. And one of the fundamental reasons why it's almost non-existent is because we do not fund the providers to be able to provide that information on a monthly, quarterly, semi-annually, annual basis. We just do not. We expect them to feedback something, and that's the problem. We expect them to feedback something. Something's not good. What we need is for them to give us, whether it's 10 questions or 100 questions, they need to answer those questions so that we can look at it holistically and say, is it working in this corner of the city? Is it working across the city? Can we compare what's going on in Boyle Heights with what's going on in Pacoima, et cetera? Because we have like-for-like information. Maybe not like-for-like activity, but we have honest, like-for-like answers to the same questions. And what I'm hoping to get help from you, and I'm hoping I get the answer I'm looking for, can you help us with that? I don't have a
I think
PhD.
I can help with the evaluation and the measurement end. What programs are the best programs that
No,
you're
you
gonna have
leave that
to
up
go
to the
elsewhere.
city.
That's
You-
not.
You leave
that's
that up
not
to the
me.
city. That's the funder's
No.
responsibility.
Yes, I think it
If
is.
we're funding something, we should be able to say we're funding it because it's working.
And in
But-
my interviews, the people that I talk to, although, as I said, there's some skepticism, I think would welcome some good evaluation that would give them feedback on an ongoing basis about what's working and what's not working, because they generally work too hard to not know and to not be helped.
But what I gather from especially the intervention providers throughout the city that I've talked to, is that they're not afraid of evaluation.
No,
What they don't want is a demand of evaluation when they can't meet that demand because they're not trained, they don't understand what it is and how to communicate back to the city. And on top of that, they don't have the resources to provide that. So they need to be trained on how to do that, and then we have to trust that they get it and they know how to communicate back with us. And then secondly, we have to fortify our contracts with money so that they can either hire somebody, or if they're lucky, somebody within their ranks already has the ability and expertise to do so themselves, and to be able to report back honestly what is going on in their program and why they feel they're successful by answering our questions, not by just telling us how they feel. But we don't have that. And what I'm hoping to get from you, and I'll throw you in on this one too, Georgia, what I would like is to find out if you can help us with that. And if you can help us with that, what is it going to take for us to get that support and that expertise?
I think that I can help you with at least working through that, and whether that's
Well, we
on
need to
the
give you
training
something to
end.
work with.
I hope so.
Yeah. I mean, we have programs, but what we don't have is, we haven't even provided you, because we haven't answered that question for ourselves, what it is we're actually trying to get at. We're not even at step one yet when it comes to evaluation and feedback from the street level of providers.
But I think given your motion yesterday that was passed, I think now there is an added kind of urgency, if I may use that word, because you are going to be requiring quarterly reports out of the mayor's office precisely on these issues, how well these different programs are doing. So I think we're coming to critical mass in terms of developing something like this. I do. I mean, they can't give a quarterly report.
Well, I can guarantee you this committee is going to be asking of the mayor's office about what progress is, how they measure that progress, why they feel it's going well in one area and not in another, or whatever they give us. We're going to be asking them the tertiary questions of, what do you mean by that? How can you say that? Why are you saying that? Provide us with answers, provide us with documentation. I'll tell you, I've said it many times, if they want to be the one-stop shop of this that we're developing here in the city, and apparently the mayor welcomes it, well, good luck, and I'm here to help. But at the same time, I am not here to gloss over any idea that because it's the mayor and not a department, that I'm going to be soft on my questioning. It's the same thing. Because we don't know if tonight we're going to hear on the news, or I'm going to get a phone call from my senior lead officer saying there's been a homicide in your district, or we see on the news that there's a double homicide in Boyle Heights, or what have you. We don't know. So the bottom line is the questions that we ask during the day better help us arrive at how we can prevent those homicides or impact them in some fashion. And right now, we don't know, but I am not willing to say, like some politicians around the city, that nothing's working in the city. I've seen it firsthand. I've talked to victims firsthand. I've talked to people who are now out of a gang and into a job and are no longer involved in that kind of activity because there's an intervention program where they got their tattoos removed, they did go for a job interview, they did get hired, and they're on the job for years now. And they're clean, so to speak. So, Todd, you didn't do that. Georgia, you didn't do that. I didn't do that. I don't think Mr. Weisheit here did that. But there's people in the audience here who can actually say unequivocally and honestly that they've actually engaged in that scenario and have that success. Now, that being the case, I'm not willing to say that nothing good is happening out there, or that we can't find, the good programs, or we can't find the programs that are actually doing the day-to-day good work. I'm not willing to say that because that's just not true. They are getting it done. The sad part is you or I cannot accumulatively say how much of that is going on and where it's happening. We can't. And that's not the program's fault. That's the city's fault. That's our fault. They didn't put the system together. They're literally third-party providers. And we, the city, are the provider. We're the funder. And we're supposed to be the evaluator. We're supposed to be the ones asking them the questions. We're supposed to be the ones demanding that they give us the feedback before we give them another round of funding. And that has just not been happening. So the purpose of this motion is to figure out if we can get there. Do you think we can get there, Todd?
I think that we can.
Why do you think we can? Everything you told me is that we haven't even started.
Because,
As a city.
I think that this is a doable thing. It's not going to be easy. Doing the measurement and the evaluation is going to be hard work, doing it well. Doing it badly gets done a lot. Not here necessarily, but it gets done a lot. Doing it well is going to be hard work, but I think that it's almost an imperative that we do it. As far as I can tell, there's just not that much money, and the money that we have to devote to this needs to be well spent on programs that work, and I think figuring out what programs work and what programs could work better, we need to do that.
Todd, we may be the victim of our own success. What if we do evaluate these programs and realize that they are working? And then we actually have to admit to ourselves that we're only funding 3% of the solution when we have 97% of the problem that we have not addressed. So that means if we're only funding at $3 million or so, maybe we need to fund at $100 million.
Maybe we do, but wouldn't it be great to know?
The city doesn't want to hear that. I mean, we're looking at cutbacks right now to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars that are going to happen in the next few weeks.
The city may want to hear it if the crime rate goes up again.
What I mean by the city doesn't want to hear it is that creates a headache for the policymakers to try to figure out how do we find the money, because remember, this is an ongoing expenditure. It's not just a one-time fund. If we add another $10 million a year, we know that at least for the short future, 5 to 10 years, we need to continue to fund that, because the overall results are not going to happen overnight, in the sense that the 90+ thousand young men and women out of work and out of school are just going to go away someday. They're still going to be there. We still need prevention. We still need intervention. So when we fund those programs, when we put them in the budget, we need to make the commitment that it's going to be there the following year and the following year and the following year. So it's something that I think that as policymakers, there's a convenience, be it subliminal or upfront, that we're not wanting to face the music and realize that maybe we should get an evaluation system in place, because maybe we're afraid of the truth. And the truth of the matter is we're underfunding this by we're only funding it, let's just say, at 3% when we need 100% funding. And 100% might be $100 million, not $3 million. In the meantime, what is it going to take for us to enlist you to support us? Do we need to put on an RFP? Is there some way in which you can help us? We already have a working group of academians and including yourself and practitioners, et cetera, who are committed to doing this, but the charge that I've given myself is that we're going to do the bulk of this work between now and July 1st, which is 80-some days. And we'd love your help, but we're going to do it.
Well, I would be
With your help, I
happy
think
to
we'll do
provide
it better. Without your help, we might be a few screws missing, but we're going to have to get it done.
Probably do fine. It's a short time frame, but I think that one of the most important initial steps will be identifying the types of programs that there is evidence for around the country that offer success for whatever outcome, whether it's gang joining or gang violence in the street, whatever it is, that we identify programs that have had success and then continue to fund or fund other agencies to provide those programs as we start working on a way to evaluate the impact of those.
Mm-hmm. Well, Georgia?
No plan is going to be successful unless there is training alongside it. And so in your 80-day trajectory, where does training or any kind of plan for training fit into this? Because I can tell you right now, Todd, with my assistance and the assistance of other individuals who are knowledgeable in this area, can draw up a beautiful, a beginning within the 80 days, but it will go to nothing if there is no no allocation made for training and instruction. And the other
Absolutely.
thing is, and Todd states this Dr. Franke states this very explicitly in his report, these agencies are already overburdened without having to take on the additional responsibility
Exactly.
of conducting evaluation. So that has to be factored in as well. Otherwise, you'll have a series of recommendations vis-a-vis measures and no way to educate or implement them. And it'll be a lovely report that goes on the shelf with 5 others or 10 others. So that's my question in terms of this 80-day trajectory. Where does training and where does any kind of assistance to these overwhelmed agencies and programs fit in?
But that's what I'm asking of you. What, in the next 80 days, we're not going to train everybody. In the next 80 days, we're
Right.
not going to have had implemented it. What we need to do is agree on what this system of evaluation should be, the components that it needs to have, and therefore, we may have to embark on other endeavors to go ahead and get the training component in place.
Okay.
Right?
Understand.
And then also be honest about the fact, and hopefully you can help us quantify what kind of funding would have to correspond to that kind of relationship on evaluation. You know, how many tens of thousands of dollars should an organization get to holistically be a part of providing the information necessary for us to evaluate? Because right now, we're not giving them any money.
No.
None, zero.
And yet we want evaluation from them. You know?
Absolutely. But again, I use the police department all the time because I can guarantee you, they have funding for evaluation. And when they say it, we say, oh, I'm sorry, yes, how much of the money do you need for evaluation? Okay, it's done. We want you to do this, we funded you to do this, so evaluation has to be a part of it, so therefore we give you the money. We've never done that with intervention prevention providers. We've never done that. And so we need to be honest about what it takes, and that's what I want. I want help in arriving at the truth of what it's going to take, and not worried about how much money it's going to be, but be reminded that it does take money, and this is the relative figures that we need to provide for organizations in order for them to participate in the evaluation.
Good.
And then it's up to the policymakers to find the money to do that. So we can count on your help?
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, your initial report, the way we read it, actually helps us understand at the street level what kinds of activities and what kinds of results need to be recognized at that level. Now what we need to do is move to the next level of figuring out how we hold programs accountable via evaluating them and having the honest feedback in order for us to, and another thing, the evaluation isn't to punish. The evaluation is for us to understand how to be, if we are effective, how to be more effective, and how to make sure that we continue to do good work out there. And that's one of the things that everybody's afraid of when they deal with government. Oh, you want to evaluate me because it's black and white. Did you meet the mark? If you did, you get continued funding. If you didn't meet the mark, out you go. That's not what it's about.
Well, there is another alternative. I mean, the other alternative is that if you're not meeting the mark in a particular area, we'll continue to fund you, but we need you to do something different. And we may tell you what that is, or you may propose something, but it doesn't always have to be, if you don't meet the mark, you're done. I mean, my recommendation would be that part of the evaluation plan be that they could count on the feedback to give them time to make the changes that were necessary, and then, move forward so that they can improve what they're doing, not so that they spend their lives being afraid when this evaluation report says this doesn't work, all my employees are unemployed.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly.
But that's the funder's choice.
I mean, but that's what we do with employees all the time in the private sector and the public sector. You hire somebody, you know that you're going to grow them into their ability to actually fill that position with the kind of expertise and knowledge they need to be truly, and that's what we call, you call somebody a journeyman, then you call somebody a senior advisor or what have you. They grow into the ability to say, now you're actually meeting that responsibility. But we don't expect that of anybody at the beginning. We expect them to be diligent, we expect them to show up, we expect them to do the basics, but we don't expect them to have the experience and the knowledge to be exactly that. When I got my first engineering job, they didn't ask me to design something by myself, but eventually they wanted me to get to the point where I was just like that person who was tenured, who actually was able to do that on their own. But in the beginning, I was there to assist, I was there to learn, I was there to grow. So we have to treat our programs that way as well,
Absolutely.
because we treat our employees that way.
Well, and they work far too hard not to be treated that way. They're too dedicated to what they're doing. It dishonors them not to treat them that way.
Absolutely. It's the dignity and respect you give somebody when they show up and say, I'm ready to work. Not that I know all the answers, not that I'm able to, change the world overnight or what have you. You give them respect and understanding that they're committed and that they are going to grow into being as effective as we need them to be. And some organizations are already there. They're just not communicating that with us. And with all due respect, they're not communicating because we haven't even figured out how to ask the questions.
Correct.
It starts with the provider, in my opinion, when it comes to evaluation. Not with, it starts with the funder, and it grows out to the provider. Now, if the provider can't get into a place to know how to communicate that back, then we have to check first, are we providing them with the tools they need to do so, like training and funding? And then after we do that, then we have to question, why is it that they're not able to communicate their results? Why is it they're not able to communicate whether or not they're successful? And we have to give them an opportunity to do that. And if they don't do that, after we've given them the appropriate opportunity, then it's time to evaluate whether or not they need to continue to be funded. That's the kind of system I think that we're ready to develop. We have to be ready to develop, and we have to do it in the next 80 days. But we have a lot of material already, including your report. Okay.
Thank you.
Anything else you'd like
No,
to add?
no, that's
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. We have a card. Noah Weiss? Noah Weiss? Yes.
I feel like Columbo. I don't know. Poor Mr. Weezer. He's not getting. You're not getting enough sleep, Mr. Weezer. New baby.
New baby.
Okay. Councilman, basically the reason that I wanted to make a comment here was in connection with the situation relative to now your motion, I guess, of yesterday, taking this to the mayor, okay? It's amazing, I guess, when you do what the women want, you're now a hero, right? They praise you, you're great. But seriously, going forward, there's a little bit of that educational reform and innovation problem, though, the mayor's 1381, where you guys pretty much just punted. We'll give the mayor this power, no accountability, no plans, no nothing. That's a little problematic, and I agree with your sense and concern about checks and balances. So in that connection, I drafted a motion for your respectful consideration to basically make this work in a way that will have accountability, have transparency, involve the public, get you the information that you need, because honestly, Assemblyman, I did it again. Councilman, basically, I think what we want, and I think you're an empowering kind of a guy, basically instead of top-down, bottom-up, I think Janice's Watts Gang Task Force has been a tremendous model. Janice herself admitted that she'd failed for 5 years. She came up with this idea. She sits there herself 2 hours every Monday, 80-90% of the time in Watts. It's a remarkable thing. It's the power just of listening. And she does it at Harbor Gateway. It's the kind of a thing, I think, in terms of, in other words, the point being, we're talking about, instead of having the bureaucrats, you people talking to yourselves, getting down like you went to Watts, and I appreciate that very much. They can deliver you a product. They can deliver you the services. They can deliver you the information a lot more effectively and a lot more efficiently than the bureaucrats can in the mayor's office, because they're down there, they're on the front lines. And this approach that's in this motion, I would ask you guys to seriously consider it, because all I see is more study motions and let's consider it. I mean, there's no account. You could have directed the mayor, for example, to say, look, I want reports, and maybe that's in effect what you're going to do anyway, but you can put it in there. You can say, I want these reports in 60 days, what you're doing, why you're doing it, what's going on, where are you going to go in 6 months, in 8 months, in 10 months, a year, that kind of thing. So that's my intent in terms of this motion, and just to maybe introduce it and get a debate going, I would offered for your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Also, understand that yesterday's motion did have those checks and balances, and that was my resistance, that I would not be in favor of moving it to the mayor's office unless we kept the appropriate checks and balances in the process. And like I said earlier, just because it's in the mayor's office, I'm not going to soften my questioning. I'm not going to soften what it is we have to do as a legislative body. They wanted it. They welcomed it. Now they have to welcome the scrutiny and the responsibility of answering the questions before the public, not behind closed doors, but right here in committee, recorded for the public to look at and listen over and over and over again to understand exactly what they just heard.
Okay.
So we always welcome your input, and that's why we've created the Community Engagement Advisory Committee, which are practitioners there out on the street. They've been working with the city for free, and quite frankly, all the documentation, they didn't charge us $500,000 to give us a
Exactly.
report.
Exactly.
They gave us a model, continue to work on that model for weeks and weeks and weeks, and they gave us the best intervention model that
Bingo.
has ever been created,
Exactly.
and we didn't have to pay a dime.
That's
So,
exactly my point.
trust me, I am going to be working in that direction. I can guarantee you this, I am not going to vote for any more studies that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Forget it. Those days are gone. If somebody wants to do a study, they better figure out how to do it for free, or they better give it to us on pennies on the dollar, and then maybe we'll consider paying for it. But until we see results, because some of these reports are lacking, they're lacking in providing us the information we need to have the kind of progress we need to have.
We'll take a look at that motion. I really appreciate you being
Appreciate it.
considered. Thank you very much.
Thank
Mr. Weezer, you too, and get some sleep.
We're here on open comment on this item. Is there anybody else here on item number 1? We only had one public comment card filled out on item number 1. Public comment on item number 1 is now closed. With that, we'll continue this item in committee. We now move to the second item on the agenda.
Item 2, CAO and CLA report relative to the steps necessary to create a new city department for the management of all the city's youth development and gang prevention and intervention programs pursuant to motion Cardenas Parks.
Good morning. Felipe Chavez with the CLA's office. At the meeting of April 3rd, your committee instructed the CLA's office to report back on the steps necessary to create a new department that would house all youth development and gang prevention and intervention programs, and on any commission form to oversee the new department. Attachment A to our report contains some of the general steps necessary to create such department. These steps represent a broad overview of the various issues associated with such effort and include conducting a survey of all programs affected, which has already been completed, and analyze in depth the various issues associated with the transfer of programs and functions, including legal matters, required ordinances, resources, personnel, employment, and administrative issues. If it is determined to move forward, the CLA and CAO should be instructed to report back to this committee with a timeline and implementation strategy associated with the steps in Attachment A. Additionally, should your committee wish to consider a phased-in approach, we can begin reviewing the options to form a city commission. Our office can certainly report back with more information on the types of commissions.
Okay. Well, since last week's meeting, a lot has transpired, and it looks as though what we have today is we have the need to understand from both the CLA and the CAO's office about what it would take to move the programs from departments into an elected office, in this case, the mayor's office. So what I'd like for the CLA and the CAO to report back on is the steps that it would take and starting to get more involved in the details of what are the responsibilities and the steps that need to be taken to move programs from departments and into the mayor's office, specifically the programs that we discussed in this motion already, that you will report back on this motion already. And obviously engage the relevant departments, like personnel is going to have to be involved, because we've said over and over in this committee, and I still don't understand myself, how you move all the mechanisms it takes to move personnel that are I'm drawing a blank. They work.
Civil service.
So, excuse me, yes, civil service workers into exempt positions, or if there's some kind of mechanism that exists where there's other ways in which you can do that legally besides a full transfer or what have you. I don't know. I'm not suggesting it, but again, I'm not an expert in personnel matters. I don't know anything about that. I would assume that has occurred in the past at some time, be it one person or 100 people or what have you. But in this case, we know that based on the programs that were described, it may involve hundreds of bodies, right? May?
I don't think 100 in the first round of this.
Your name, please?
Depending upon how big.
Your name,
Your name?
Tom Coltis from the CAO's office. In what was originally scoped, probably not as many as 100, but in the biggest scoping, including some of the recreation and parks programs, for example, then possibly, yes, over 100.
Okay. All right. So the bottom line is I'm sure that what we have to go through with one person is a duplication over and over and over again by the multitude of individuals. And then also, I don't know if there's any complication of the matter when you're going beyond an individual and moving an entire crew, top to bottom, from civil service to an elected office. Does that create other elements of responsibility and activity that needs to occur in order for us to do that legally?
This is clearly one of those cases where it is the exact detail of what you are attempting to achieve, which will drive a whole bunch of outcomes. Because how you do it and what you do, the impacts are different. And, for example, if you are stopping an activity and then recreating a new activity, that looks different than taking an existing activity and moving an existing activity. So it entirely depends upon what exists today and what is proposed for the future, and then how the exact mechanics of how that transition needs to take place.
How soon can you report to this committee those two differences?
I think we have to see what the mayor's office proposes in terms of what it is proposing to assume in its model, and then the mechanics of how that takes place will be driven by what they're attempting to achieve in the model that they're going to propose.
Did they tell you when they're going to propose?
I would expect it would be in the budget.
Okay, and that's coming, the mayor's proposing his version of the budget next week?
April 20th, 21st.
Okay. So what we'll do, okay, we'll hear this in this committee in 2 weeks so that you can give us a verbal on what you think you see in the mayor's budget when it comes to the style in which they want to do it, so that you can start to tell us what direction you think they're going in. And then we'll give you 30 days from that time to report back in more detail about what all the mechanisms and responsibilities there are that would have to be traversed in order to meet that demand.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Because I would imagine as soon as the report, the mayor's proposed budget comes out, you're going to be sifting through it right away, right?
In terms of this particular issue, definitely.
That's what I thought. Yeah, good. Good. I was hoping you'd say that. Okay. And in addition to that, be mindful of the fact that we're also going to need to understand whether or not there are any fiscal impacts, if any, in such a transition. Like, in other words, the transition process, are there any fiscal impacts due to the transition process? Okay.
We'll know that by virtue of how it's proposed, and then whatever is proposed, that drives a whole bunch of, it drives the labor relations issues, it drives the
Exactly.
civil service issues. If it drives space issues, it will drive space issues, those types of things as well.
Okay. All right. Is anybody here to comment on item number 2? Okay, item number 2, public comment is now open. Public comment is now closed on item number 2. With that, we'll put this item back on the agenda in 2 weeks with the report back on the process, verbal report back on, a preliminary verbal report back on moving from programs from departments to the mayor's office. Okay.
Okay.
All right. With that, we'll move to item number 3 and 4. We'll hold them both together.
Item 3, motion Gruel, Hans, Zine, Weiss relative to developing comprehensive performance measures and evaluation process for all anti-gang and youth development programs funded by the city. And item 4, motion Gruel, Hans, Zine, Weiss relative to establishing a process to re-procure all youth and family service contracts within 6 months of creating the consolidated anti-gang unit and establishing evaluation criteria.
Okay. Claire, you presenting on behalf of the author?
Yes, thank you. Good morning.
Morning.
Council members. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to come here before your committee today. I am here on behalf of Councilwoman Wendy Gruel, who unfortunately was scheduled to be elsewhere this morning. When the Audits and Governmental Efficiency Committee heard these 2 motions that you have before you today just last week, the Councilwoman commented on the similarities between some of the various proposals she had made and the motions that Chairman Cardenas proposed. She was happy with the outcome of the substitute motion discussed in Council yesterday, which brought together many of the issues raised in the Councilwoman's original motions. Yesterday's motion is truly a call to action. The motions push city forces to take action immediately to begin the process of putting the different gang prevention activities into the office of the mayor. Item 3 on today's agenda, which calls for new performance measures and an evaluation process, are, as you have pointed out, essentially included in the motion approved yesterday by the City Council. I know that this committee, under the chairman's leadership, spent a great deal of time and effort creating new metrics of accountability, which is critical to measuring a program's success. However, the Councilwoman believes that it is critically important that item 4 on today's agenda be approved as well. Last week in the Audits Committee, where the item was approved unanimously, it was discussed that while we have many great service providers in the city who provide important services to our community, the Comptroller's audit did note that some of the providers in the anti-gang area may no longer be fulfilling the specific requirements of their contracts. It was also discovered that some grant recipients had not gone through a competitive bidding process in decades. Consequently, we acknowledge that there is still a great deal of work to be done. We still need to look at all of our contracts and establish a process to re-procure all youth and family services contracts within 6 months of creating the consolidated anti-gang unit and establishing the evaluation criteria, which you've also discussed today. I urge you, on behalf of the Councilwoman, to adopt this motion and send it forward to be approved by the City Council. Thank you. Question?
Claire, can you redefine what it is that we would be passing to the council in this motion, especially item number 4?
Yes, on item number
By the way, I see item number 3 is something that I think the mayor's office should speak to now with the motion that was passed by the council. So item number 3 is something that I'd like the mayor's office to speak to because they could probably shed more light on that than any of us to date. But on item number 4, what would we be passing to the council? What do you envision that action effectuating?
Well, and we acknowledge that it is also going to, at least slated for several more committees. But ultimately,
Or passed out of this committee?
yes, well, to establish and to literally re-procure, that is, establish RFP or other appropriate competitive process to freshly procure all of the gang-related contracts. So directing the departments, or ultimately, again, all this rests on the consolidation into the mayor's office, but the ultimate department responsible for coming back with a procurement plan, an RFP, whatever the case may be, for all of the contracts that affect the gang program.
Okay. So the main subsequent action of this, I see, is the reprocuring of the youth and family service contracts
Correct?
within 6 months.
Well, coming back with a plan to do so. I don't think anyone expects all of the reprocurement to occur within 6 months, but a plan to do so. Some, obviously, the contracts have different expiration dates. Some, however, are more than overdue for contracting, reprocuring.
Okay. All right. Have any questions?
No, we approve these in audits and government efficiency committee, and so we look forward to consolidating these motions with the other motions that are happening. I think they're all pretty much, well, very similar, so I think the outcomes are very similar to what the other motions are looking for.
All right. The reprocurement process obviously would involve work on behalf of the departments that are actually putting out those contracts. In addition to that, as was described earlier in item number 1,
Evaluation.
we're almost absent a process, and you actually stated, and accurately so, that some programs have been funded for years and years and years and really haven't had a real evaluation. So obviously there's a need for that. I just want to let you know that by moving this forward to other committees, it doesn't, it needs to be understood that a lot of the work is going to be done in the coming months and on that point, and a lot of that is going to be heard in this committee over and over and over until we get it right, and then we'll obviously be forwarding those off to other committees through the process so that they can vet it out as well. But as far as the actual procurement, the new procurement process and/or RFQ, RFP processes, et cetera, that's going to be vetted in this committee regardless. So I just wanted to make sure that your boss understands that this motion actually outlines what needs to be done, but a lot of the details are going to be hashed out in the coming weeks and months. And within 6 months, we definitely will have a new RFP, RFQ process in place, regardless of whether or not long-term it stays in the mayor's office or temporarily in the mayor's office. Either way, third-party providers are going to have to adhere to the new process. Okay.
Very well, thank you.
Okay. Is anybody here to speak on items number 3 and number 4? Seeing and hearing none, it'll be a recommendation of this committee to hold item number 3 in the committee. And then also, again, Claire, item number 3, the purpose of holding in the committee, because we need to hear from the mayor's office. Obviously, they're new to the new paradigm shift that happened yesterday, so we want to give them a little bit of time to address some of the questions we have on number 3 and number 4. With that, we have a motion to move it out of committee, and it does look as though it will be going to other policy committees as well, including the Housing and Economic Development Committee, Public Safety, and Budget and Finance Committee. So I have a motion and a second?
Second.
Okay, it's a minority report of this committee. As we do not have a quorum, it'll be a minority report of this committee to move it out of this committee. Okay, thank you. All right, we have closed public comment on items 3 and 4, and with that, is there anybody here for general public comment? General public comment to this committee, going once, going twice. General public comment is now closed. Okay, this committee is now adjourned. Thank you.
Good. Lunch.
Are you taking me to lunch?
I got it. That's good.